passion. All right, can we stand together? And if you have your Bibles, let's turn to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. And I'll be reading starting in verse 38. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. This is regarding Jesus and his disciples. While they were traveling, it says, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, and she came up and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? So tell her to give me a hand." The Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has made the right choice, and it will not be taken away from her." Thank you. You may be seated. Before we dive into this story, which, if you've attended church for any significant amount of time, at some point somebody has come along and preached. Poor Martha, right? Poor Martha. It's funny, Martha's probably the one that we more identify with in this story, and she gets it bad in this one. And so we're just going to do it again, all right? We're going to pick on Martha today. But before we do, I just want to provide a little bit of a foundation of something that I think is important for us to understand with how this relates to our digital world and our digital devices. The Christian worldview teaches us that we as human beings are made in the image of God. How many of you have heard that before? Right? We're made in God's image. Now, what that means is first of all, we are not God. And that's very important. Because when we talk about God, we're talking about a being who has no limits. The attributes, the characteristics of God, many of which we sing about and worship and adore week after week when we gather together. We understand that there are no limits to where he can be. There is no space that can confine God into a particular area at one time. I don't know if you know, but that's very unlike you and I and our experience, right? We're right here. This room currently confines the place in which our bodies can exist. There's no limit to what he can know, right? God is omniscient. He knows all things. And then finally, there's no limit to what he can do. But we're limited in all three of these areas. And while we are limited, we are still looking for, and we have been doing this since practically the beginning, looking for how we can more exceed the limits of such things as where we can be, what we can know, or what we can do. Right? I've made this little chart here that shows the attributes of God and how they are contrasted with the attributes of humanity. God is omnipresent, present everywhere at the same time, whereas we can only be in one place at one time. God is all-wise and all-knowing, whereas you and I possess limited knowledge. And finally, God is all-powerful, and we, of course, are limited in our power. I mean, think about how something like the digital world, and specifically, and probably most dramatically, our phones, which we carry around with us everywhere we go, make this promise to us that we will, by using them, by leveraging the tools that are on them, we will exceed what have always been our human limitations. Think about how the digital world gives us the opportunity to be in multiple places at one time. I could not be preaching right here in this place to just these people, but I could, in fact, give a speech that 100 different crowds around the world could all hear at the same time, in a sense, replicating the various places where I could be. I can meet with somebody across the country without ever leaving my home. I can be, and don't feel badly if this describes you a little bit, but I could be eating with my family while I'm responding to emails. Like I'm at home, but I'm also at work at the same time. This is something in me that is pining to be more, or to possess more of the attribute of God's omnipresence, even when it exceeds my natural capacities. When it comes to what we know, think about how the internet, our computers, our phones have given us access to the global collection of all knowledge. We can, all in practically a moment, be presented with the goings-on of hundreds of people through things like social media feeds. Think about how information is constantly being pushed to us if you subscribe to one or more news feeds, or if you get notifications from the social media applications that you subscribe to, the push notifications that happen on our devices, the junk email that every single morning we have to start our day off by cleaning out and purging so that we can get to the good stuff, the advertisements that we are constantly bombarded with. This is all in an effort to make us feel like we have exceeded our natural capacities. Finally, when it comes to the power or the ability for us to do things, think about how much the digital world has enabled us to accomplish more than anyone in history could ever have accomplished. The fact that we are plugged in has made the promise to us that we can now be more productive. And we, especially in modernity, we see or make equivalent being productive with being valuable, right? The more productive I am, the more I am worth. And so what we are finding here is that this digital revolution that many of us have lived, during the transition of which some of us have been born right into it, it has raised the ceiling of our limitations. So now let's talk about Martha. The picture that Luke draws in the story is Martha's throwing a dinner party for Jesus and his disciples. And so Jesus shows up, and Martha's sister Mary also shows up. But when Mary comes, she sits down along with Jesus and the rest of his followers. Luke tells us that she sits down and she listens to the words that Jesus is speaking. She is all about being in the place and in the presence of Jesus. Martha, on the other hand, she was in a whirlwind of activity and things to do. And the first clue we have that Martha has some kind of problem is the word but. Look at the story. Now, what I think would be interesting is if we had a blank sheet of paper, and if I asked you to retell this story from memory, whether you've heard it today for the first time or you've heard it many, many times, read it many times yourself, our tendency would be to write or to rewrite the story this way. Well, Martha was busy in the kitchen getting everything ready, but her lazy, useless sister, Mary, was just sitting in the living room. right? Martha would, in essence, again, because many of us probably more closely identify with Martha, we would have her leading the story. And even if we actually understood that Mary was more the hero of the two of them, it would still, the contrast would be something like leading with Martha. Martha was busy. She was getting things ready. Martha was doing everything she could to be a good and hospitable hostess, right? Jesus was coming to her house after all. Like, who wouldn't find themselves in a flurry of activity trying to make everything just so? Because it is Jesus, after all, that is coming to visit. No problem. And we say, but Mary, Mary decided that she wasn't going to help. She'd rather sit with Jesus. But that's not how the story goes. When their activities are contrasted, the activities of these two sisters, Mary is introduced first, right? It says Mary sat and listened to Jesus, but Martha, that's our first clue that Martha is the one who's got a little bit of a problem. For Martha, there was just too much to do. For Mary, there was lots to do, but there was only one place to be. Next, we are told Martha was distracted, right? So Luke tells us, but Martha was distracted by the many things she had to do. This is a critique. Like, we have to just accept and understand what the author here is describing. He is not attacking things like being productive or being efficient or going out of one's way to serve someone else, but still, he lays a kind of critique regarding Martha's busyness. He describes her as being distracted. That is the essence of the critique. And what we need to understand is that when it comes to distraction is the enemy of the important. Distraction stands in opposition to what is important. The word we translate distraction in English, the Greek word, is perispao, which means the physical act of pulling or dragging someone away. And it can be used figuratively, like it is used here, of distracting someone. In other words, it isn't that Martha was physically pulled or dragged away, but her mind was pulled away. When used figuratively, the word describes something like our mind, our attention is being focused on something, but our minds are pulled away from that thing. Now, I want you to think about our digital world and our digital devices, how these things give us an unlimited number of things to access, an unlimited number of things to see, an unlimited number of things to do. And my question for us is, have we recognized how often all of those things actually pull us away from something that is more important? I wonder, over the last day or the last week, when would you say your phone filled your time with something to do where you would have been better off doing something or being somewhere else? Because distraction is the enemy of the important. Now, what exactly was Martha distracted by? Well, she was distracted by many tasks. She took on a large load of tasks. Again, very understandable. Right? Everybody wants to be a good host when somebody is coming to visit. And so we busy ourselves with getting the house ready and everything in order. If we're preparing a meal of not just simply throwing haphazardly something together, but of being very deliberate and conscious of what it is that we're trying to do. But Martha here, she's described as self-selecting and taking on a load of tasks. And we find here in this dizzying pace of multitasking, or as some people now call it, hypertasking. How many of you know hypertasking is amazing? Like, how many of you, just be honest, how many of you would describe yourselves as good multitaskers? Okay, so maybe we're not as efficient as Curtis Lake as we thought we were. No, really, how many of you would say, like, I'm pretty good at juggling multiple balls all at once? Anybody? Like, all right. And wouldn't you say that when you are multitasking or even hypertasking, when it's all going well, isn't it exhilarating? Isn't it invigorating? The feeling that you're being so productive, that you are so efficiently moving on through the list of tasks that you need to complete? And this is Martha. And it was all going great, just like for us, multitasking, it's all great until it isn't. Right? She comes to Jesus, frantic, beside herself, and says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? You see, productivity is invigorating, but when it exceeds our human capacity, here's one of the things that happens. People tend to get trampled. People tend to get trampled over for the sake of getting everything that needs to get done. I'll bet it wouldn't be really hard for you to remember a time when you found yourself so busy and so overcome by all of the things that you had to do, that in your movement of getting through those lists of to-dos, you left a wake of collateral damage behind you. Somebody got trampled. Somebody got walked all over. Somebody got forgotten. Many of you in the room are parents. And I'll bet that there's been many, many times when, in a moment when your child needed your attention was instead directed elsewhere. And the good news is you got the thing, or you got the things done. The bad news is if you just look behind you, you see the trail of destruction that getting all of those things done cost you. Not only do we sometimes just trample over others, but we also begin to experience in ourselves, I can't tell you, I mean, this probably happens to me at least every day, where I have all of these things that I need to do, but all of those things actually measure up to something that is beyond my capacity. It exceeds my limitation, even though I have all of these things around me that promise me I'm going to be more productive, I'm going to be more efficient, I'm going to be able to get more things done. And when it doesn't happen, I'm disappointed. And that disappointment usually, perhaps always, turns inevitably into resentment. That's what we see here. Jesus, don't you care that my sister has left me all alone to serve? What is that? That's resentment. All of these things that Martha thought were so important to get done have her now feeling deep-seated resentment toward her sister. But not only does productivity, when it starts to go wrong, have a tendency of trampling over others, while productivity is invigorating, when it exceeds my limited capacity, it can also be incredibly painful. That is, when things start to fall apart, I fall apart. How many of you have experienced this before? Right? You had an idea of how everything was going to go. And you understood the order in which things needed to be done. You had a sense of how long each of those things was going to take, but then something takes a little longer. And what happens? There's like this domino effect. And things start to fall apart. Things start to unravel. And what happens? We start to fall apart, and we start to unravel. Again, just emphasizing a little differently what Martha says to Jesus here. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? What is she pointing to? She's pointing to the loneliness that she's experiencing in the distress of things not going the way she had intended for them to go. Now, I want you to catch this. This is so important. What we find here being described is that this event that should have been all about Jesus showing up and being in Martha's home. I mean, think about that. Just like think about if the next notification you got on your phone was from Jesus himself and said, hey, is it all right if I stop by this afternoon? But instead of this being about the fact that Jesus, the eternal Son of God, the Creator and Savior of the world, showing up at her house, it became about Martha. That's all she could see. Her vision was limited to what she was experiencing in her loneliness, utterly forgetting the wonder. Jesus is in my house. And so our digital world, it promises us that it will raise our capacities. It will extend our limitations. It'll give us the ability to do more of what we want to do. But Justin Earley asks this question. What if the good life, right, which is something we all want. We all want the good life. That's why we engage so much in this digital world, because we've come to believe that it's going to give us a bigger piece of the good life. So we all want the good life. But the question is, well, what if the good life doesn't come from having the ability to do what we want? But what if the good life instead comes from having the ability to do what we were made for? Of living within the confines of our capacities and our limitations. So let me ask you this morning, what are the many things that have you worried and upset? Right? Jesus responds to Martha, Martha, you're troubled, you're anxious about so many things. I ask you this morning, what are the many things that have you worried and upset? Let's not forget, we can't be in more than one place at one time. Regardless of how the digital landscape makes us feel as if that is no longer true. And you know that. You know that when your face is deep down into the screen, you cannot at the same time be present with the others who are in the room. We can only be in one place at one time. We can't know everything there is to know. We feel like, well, it's just a few keyboard clicks or thumb taps away for me being able to know the answer to this thing. But we can't know everything there is to know, and we can't do everything there is to do. And so I ask you, not only what are the many things that have you worried and upset, but I also ask you, what is the one thing that is necessary? Jesus said, Mary has chosen the one thing that is needful, the one thing that is necessary, the one thing that is important, and it will not be taken away from her. You and I, we have over and over and over again, we have sacrificed and we have laid at the altar the one thing because we've gone after the many things. So let me just share with you 3 suggestions to help with focusing better on the important thing. Number 1, minimize distractions. This is something we need to do. We need to consciously and proactively go about minimizing the distractions in our life. Organizational research has shown that using our digital devices to multitask is actually less productive than if we focused on a single task at one time. That research indicates that when our attention is interrupted or distracted, it takes at least 20 minutes to regain our focus. This is why we don't think deeply. This is why we don't think well. This is why we have a hard time paying attention to a single thing for any given amount of time, because we give into these distractions. It pulls us away. Remember, that word means to pull or to drag someone away. And then it takes forever. 20 minutes feels like a lifetime these days for us to regain our focus. So we need to minimize the distractions. This is what the digital fast is all about. This is why we are engaged in this practice of just giving up these things for a period of 28 days so that we can better understand the role that they are actually playing in our lives. We need to learn, what is it that is distracting us? Where and when are we being distracted? And then, what is the important or needful thing we are missing? Secondly, we need to embrace boredom. How many of you like being bored? That's a lie. We don't. We don't like being bored. We abhor boredom. Anger is the emotion that we as human beings suppress the most. Think about that. The feeling of anger that we encounter, probably many times over the course of the day, is the thing that we have, I guess sort of fortunately, but perhaps we do this in unhealthy ways. It is the emotion that we as human beings suppress the most. Guess what the second emotion we suppress the most is? It's boredom. It's boredom. We hate being bored. That's why when we find ourselves suddenly encountering a moment of boredom, I don't want to mess up my screen time statistics, so. Got $100 on the line, right, Ben? That's why we do that. That's why we just like unconsciously reach for something to occupy our minds because we hate it. It's just like, you ever been in a room and experienced with other people the awkward silence? You know who loves awkward silence? This guy. I love it. Because I know how uncomfortable everybody else is with it. I'm like, I'm all right with it. I don't need to talk all the time. I know that's probably hard for you to believe on a Sunday morning, but let me share with you a little bit of how our brains work. when our minds are not fixated on something, like when we are going about a particular task that needs to be accomplished, when we are in the mode of being productive, certain parts of our brains turn off. Do you know that? Like certain parts of our brains actually shut down as I focus, as I fixate on something, in order to allocate the resources necessary to doing that thing. So it's not bad. But when I'm not fixated on something, then my mind is allowed to wander. Like all of the parts of my brain are open, available, and processing. So that boredom is not actually time that's lost, it's time spent doing something else, and something that is, in fact, very important. So when I'm productive, when I am like getting it done, here's the parts that shut off. The part where I do self-discovery. When I'm working, when I am intent, when I am focused on something, I am not learning more about who I am. That part of my brain is shut off. Not only that, but the part where I can imagine how someone else is feeling is also shut off. That should be no surprise to us, right? Like, you ever been so focused? I mean, we kind of talked about this already. This is why we trample over people, as we're like moving through the task list, because the parts of our brains that can recognize how someone else is feeling, they're turned off, right? And so the ability to do self-discovery, of asking questions like, who am I really? What is it that brought me to where I am right now? And who am I becoming? Where am I going? All of those things I'm unable to contemplate when my mind and my attention is focused on something. The ability to see something that's beautiful that I'd never noticed before. Where does that come? Well, that comes in a moment where my mind is not fixated on some particular task. And so, when we're working and it's time to be productive, it's good and it's important for our brains to shut maybe some of those other things off so that we can kind of go about doing the things that we need to do. But we cannot maintain that pace every waking moment of the day. And so now, when I'm not being productive and I experience a moment of boredom, when I take that moment and I fill it with some unimportant distraction, like reaching for a game on my phone or scrolling through social media, then I lose the opportunity of discovering things about myself. I lose the opportunity of maybe reflecting on the past couple of hours of work that I did, and did I do harm to someone else? Did I fail to pay attention to how the way I went about my work, how that made someone else feel? And so in the workbooks, one of the exercises we had this week, I don't know, day 4, day 5 or something, challenges us when we experience different emotions to say, like, what is the app that we reach for? And so one of those questions was, when I'm bored, the app I usually open is what? So embrace boredom. And then finally, we need to think about managing our attention more than managing our time. We think we have a time problem, but I would just suggest that we don't really have a time problem. What we have is an attention problem. That's our challenge. Distraction isn't the opposite of attention. That's the way we think of, like, oh, I spend so much time and so many resources allocated on being attentive to something. I need these distractions. Like, I need to just sort of plunge myself down on the couch and numb out to 18 episodes of my favorite Netflix series, right? Or I need to just numb out to 3-4 hours of mindless scrolling on TikTok. But distraction isn't the opposite of attention. Instead, what distraction is, in fact, is too much attention on something of little importance. Distraction isn't a lack of attention, it is attention. It's just a poor form of attention on something that is not important. Think about it. Like when you play a game or scroll videos or shop online, you're not giving that thing a little bit of attention. Most often, you're finding you end up lost in the distraction of that thing. Like there's things going on in the room, in the house, and you don't even hear the noise of it because you're actually focused on whatever that distraction is. How many of you like it when somebody starts yapping during a movie? Right? Or you're watching a game or something. Somebody wants to start talking. And isn't that obnoxious? I mean, I know we don't watch commercials anymore because we fast forward through them, but back in the day, it's like, wait till the commercial before you start asking me questions. So the problem isn't that we don't have enough time. The problem is, I think, more for us, we don't have a clear sense of what we ought to do. Richard Foster said, and Richard Foster wrote this incredible stuff on spiritual disciplines. And he wrote that in contemporary society, he's writing this like in the 1970s. But he said, in contemporary society, our adversary, the devil, majors in three things: noise, hurry, and crowds. And if he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied. So let me just close with asking you this set of questions. What do I give my attention to? What am I giving my attention to? And let me follow that up with, what should I be giving my attention to? What do I invest my brain power in, and what should I be investing my brain power in? What do I invest my emotional energies in, and what should I invest my emotional energies in? If the tools of our adversary are noise, hurry, and the crowds, well, I have to understand better about myself. Well, what is my noise? What is the noise in my life that the adversary, the devil, is using? That where he finds joy and satisfaction in seeing me give in to the noise of my life. Why do I hurry? If it is his tactic to try to have me constantly bustling about the many things that need to be done, and he's just kind of sitting back in his chair laughing. He doesn't have to make me sin. He doesn't have to try to entice or draw me into doing something that is unspeakable. He can be just happy and satiated at the fact that I'm not growing any closer to God, and that the relationships in my life are all disintegrating and falling apart because I have given into the haste and the busyness and the hurry of this world. What are the crowds that I have a tendency to hide in? Like, where am I hiding in? How am I distracting myself? How am I immersing myself in this thing or that? And then I have to ask myself, well, what do I need to do to change these things? Are there certain people that I need to bring into my life to help me to change? Are there moments of silence that I need to consciously and proactively incorporate into my life so that I have the opportunity to not have my mind fixated on anything in particular, but that it is free to wander so that I can experience the beauty of self-discovery and seeing and understanding others around me better? Do I need space? Do I need to actually find myself finding physical space where I can better connect with what is more important? Do I need to embrace some kind of new teaching? Like, I think that what we're doing here in this activity of a digital fast is a profound opportunity, if we will take it seriously, to change some things about our lives. Or is there just something else maybe that you right now are thinking about, the Holy Spirit is kind of nudging you with? Our anchor verse for this series is, turn my eyes from worthless things and give me life through your word. We're looking for Jesus to breathe back life into our being. Amen?